So here's your Greek. Rabbi, right there. What do you think does that mean in Greek? Teacher? Anybody else? No options. Okay. Good. It's a trick question. It means absolutely nothing in Greek. Okay, what does the word kitchen mean in Russian? Nothing, because kitchen is an English word. There's a Russian version of the word kitchen, but that's not the same word, right? So when we borrow a word from another language, it doesn't necessarily have an automatic meaning in that host language. So when you meet word rabbi in Greek, most Greek readers would say, what the heck does that mean? I don't know. Let's keep reading. And then you figure it out in context, okay? So the word rabbi doesn't really mean anything in Greek, but in Hebrew it's a different story. So we have word Rabbi right there, and it means my master, literally, my master. How do we get there? Very simple. We have the word Rav, okay, which means usually much or many. In Hebrew, Rav usually speaks of the volume of something as many, okay, or magnitude of something, much, okay. So that's the word. It's very, very common Hebrew word. It's used of all sorts of things. But then what you do is you add the suffix yod on the end, and it becomes mine, okay, my master, not just master, my master. Okay, and that's how the Hebrew forms. So essentially, like, you know, if you think so many words in Hebrew do the same thing, like you have shel, sheli, right? Or whatever. Shachachti, I forgot, okay? Ani shachachti, or something like that. You know, I forgot. Not just forgot, but I forgot. So every time in Hebrew you would use the ending yod like that, it would be mine. So that's how we get Rav, which means great or many, and then mine. So somebody who is mine, who has much to give. Let's put it that way. That's really the etymology of the word. It's really that simple. So Rav is that kind of word that we see in Torah all the time, every place. We have the cloud of God's presence that stands over the tabernacle, okay, the Mishkan, and it says that it stood there for many days, yamim rabim. So there's that adjective, right? Many days. Much, many, substance. That's a number. So the Rav really, in the Hebrew Bible, if you read it, the term starts to designate different officials, chiefs, various people in charge of something, some things, sort of say, all throughout the Hebrew Bible. And it certainly, as you read it, as you meet it on the pages of the Hebrew Bible, you will see that it designates authority, and a lot of times it designates person's capacity and competence for doing something. When you're really good at something, you are a master of that task. Okay, essentially. So that's how the word Rav a lot of times is being used. As a master, but in the sense of you're in charge. You really know what you're doing. Okay, you're on top of it. So, for example, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, promotes Daniel. And when he promotes Daniel, he calls him in Aramaic Rabbi. Okay? He calls him a rabbi. But of course it doesn't mean a rabbi, because this is Daniel's time. It means a ruler of some sort. It means an officer or chief. And if you study Daniel and you understand Daniel's position at the court, that's what he is. He's somebody in charge. So we get this idea. I wasn't 100%, honest with you when I told you you're not going to find Rabbi in the Hebrew Bible. Well, technically, you find it in the Aramaic Bible, okay? Because that portion of Daniel is in Aramaic. So Rabbi, that's what he's called. And therefore, when we come to this word Rav and Rabbi, it's translated as master or sir. That's really what it means in that era, in that time, in that slice of history, okay? So remember, when we're trying to establish the meaning of the word, the meanings of the words, they do not stand still. They change throughout history. And you have to be very careful whenever we read the Bible. You have to ask yourself, what era is this talking about? And what meaning did that word have at that time and in that era? Because I will tell you honestly, most of the time, the meaning that you have in mind is a contemporary meaning, which may not always line up 100% with that ancient meaning. So we're always chasing that original ancient meaning. How did the people who lived back then use those words? And that's what I'm doing with you. I'm basically tracing the meaning of the word rabbi with you, and I'm beginning with the Hebrew Bible. I'm starting with the Torah and moving through the prophets and getting us to that first century when that word really begins to mean something very, very specific. Let's put it that way. All right. So as far as Jewish literature goes, if you're going to survey the Jewish literature, what are you going to find? Most of the Jewish literature in the Hellenistic era, specifically the late Hellenistic era, was written in Greek. Yes. Jews chose to write in Greek, which is no different of the choice of how Jews choose to write today. If you're going to be writing a really good book today, which language would you choose? English. Thank you very much. So guess what? Greek was the English of that day. You want to influence the most people? You want your words to be heard and read and understood? You write in Greek. That's what Jews did. They spoke Greek, they wrote Greek. Doesn't make their literature any less Jewish. They just wrote in that language. So, and oftentimes, when the books were written in that era, they were penned by professional scribes, often outside of Israel, and those scribes were not as, they wouldn't have the same affinity and liking of the Hebraisms that the gospel writers did. See, gospel writers, they just wrote how they felt. And a lot of times, what they felt was not in Greek. So they just kind of threw in a few Hebrew Aramaic words here and there. But the professional scribe would polish it off. They wouldn't do that. And so a lot of times Jewish literature from that era, you're not going to find references to rabbi even in Greek. Okay? And this is really interesting because as you go through all the traditional sources where I would look, you're not going to find it. So I looked it up. I looked for rabbi in Maccabees, for example, and I couldn't find it. The book of Maccabees is a great Jewish book, right? The story of Hanukkah. Hello. We get the story of Hanukkah from Maccabees. We're about to celebrate that. But it was all written in Greek. So I thought maybe they would have a term. Nope. They used the word didaskalos, which means teacher. And that actually talks about somebody who was probably a rabbi in 2 Maccabees 1:10 in the letter to Aristobulus, but he calls him didaskalos instead of using the Hebrew or Aramaic term. That would have been a Hebraism. And so, no, his writing was well polished, and it was way more, edited, that Hebraism did not make it. And so then I'll look at Josephus. I'm thinking, Josephus, maybe Josephus will talk about rabbis. Josephus talks about all things Jewish. And Josephus is writes very great things about Jews. No, because he's writing to a Roman audience, he calls all the Jewish teachers, as many times as he talks about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and so and the Essenes, he calls them sophists. Because he wants to present to his Roman audience Jews as philosophers. They're the enlightened thinkers, not much different like you guys have. That's what he wants them to see. So he uses that language. So guess what? Not going to find the word rabbi in Josephus. Now I'm thinking, okay, maybe Philo. Philo has written so much, okay? Philo has got commentaries on Torah. Surely Philo somewhere slipped in a word rabbi here and there. Guess what? Nope. Philo is writing in diaspora, and he's in Egypt, and he chooses to use proper Greek. And he does not use the word rabbi. He uses the word didaskalos, teacher, once again. So you're starting to get the idea what that word might mean. And that is how the term rabbi will appear in most period literature. In most Jewish literature of that period, you're not going to see that spelling rabbi. You're going to see the term didaskalos, because that was the standard translation into proper Greek. And so when people did not slip up and use Hebrew and Aramaic, they basically used that word didaskalos. And so the best literary sources we have are in the Gospels. And it's also possible that the term rabbi, especially the way it's spelled in Greek, seems to be very local. It's particularly in Israel. So books and writings and inscriptions that you would find in Israel, they will try to use Greek letters and spell a Hebrew word. But once you leave the territory of Israel, it's back to the dust clause. So that's the problem we have. If we search the literature of the period, we're just not going to find many references to Rabbi. Okay? And that's why we come to the Gospels, because the Gospels becomes the primary source that tends to use that word liberally.